Welcome friends. Today in this fourth lecture on the third topic of the first unit in our paper number CC 102, we shall continue with the discussion of the Elizabethan poetry. The characteristics, the major features of the Elizabethan poetry we have seen in the earlier lectures, and then we also talked about the major forms of poetry written and published during this period. We also talked about the sonnets in detail, because sonnet was a major form of poetry written and published during this time. We saw the sonneteers such as Wyatt and Surrey, Sidney, Spenser, Shakespeare, Daniel, Drayton, etc. The contribution is very great in the field of poetry by these sonneteers. Now the other form of poetry during this period is song. Let us talk about songwriters. The birth of song was a distinctive merit of the Elizabethans. Distinctive merit, it's a good quality of the Elizabethans to have the song form in this time. During the last 20 years of the 16th century, many poets came up with their long poems of the allegorical kind, as well as brief lyrics and songs. We are talking about the last 20 years of the 16th century. The Elizabethan period is so wealthy during the time span. We have so many poets, so many songwriters. So the 20 years at the close of the 16th century, we have many songwriters. Poets came up with their long poems of the allegorical kind. Allegorical means in Gujarati we have the word Rupakatmak Prakarana Kavyo, as well as the brief lyrics and songs. Small lyrics and songs were also produced during the last 20 years of the 16th century. There is the lyric of pure joy or grief. The theme of those lyrics are joy or grief, and there is the longer, graver, reflective lyric. Long lyrics also were produced, graver or more serious, and reflective lyrics revealing the attitude towards life. Attitude towards life means the philosophy of life, the aptitude to look at life is revealed in these lyric poetry. Sometimes this work appeared independently, sometimes it was inserted in the plays and prose pamphlets of the time. Now, how these poems were produced or published? Sometimes they were published independently as the poetry, and sometimes these songs were inserted into the plays. Now this is a new method adopted by some of the poets and the dramatists, and they were also inserted into some prose pamphlets published in this time. Some of the authors like Thomas Lodge and Robert Greene practiced this method in their works that far exceeded in merit. So the writers like Thomas Lodge and Greene, they practiced this method of inserting songs into their plays, and these plays they exceeded in merit, so they became very popular among the readers. In those days, works of single authors were less read than the collections in which some publishers brought together sets of verses by different authors. Now, what was the choice of the readers during that time? The readers chose to read the collection of prose as well as poetry published by published and written by different poets as well as writers. So there were some publishers who brought together sets of verses, sets of articles written by different authors. They got collected into a single collection and they were published. So the people who wanted to read the variety of songs and poetry and articles, they chose such collections for their reading. So it was a method or rather a fashion of the time. Some of the collections that came out were Paradise of Dainty Devices. These are the names of the collections which were very popular among the readers. Paradise of Dainty Devices, A Handful of Pleasant Delights, Phoenix Nest, The Passionate Pilgrim, and England's Helicon. These are the names of the collections published during the time which were the most favorite one among the readers of the time. It was in collections such as these that some of the poets like Nicholas Breton and Richard Brimfield placed their best works. The poems of such authors like Nicholas Breton and Richard Brimfield, they were placed in the collections published by these publishers. The names we have already seen in the earlier slide. Shortest pieces and especially the songs are what is best in these collections. In these collections we find shortest pieces and especially the songs. The Elizabethan age cannot claim the song exclusively, for songs were made throughout the English Renaissance. The Elizabethan age cannot claim that song was only produced in that era. It was written and produced in the whole of English Renaissance age. Songs are all time and all countries. Songs are of all time and all countries, means no particular age can claim for a particular genre of literature. The songs were everywhere on the stage and in romances. Songs were everywhere. Independently they were published, and on the stage also, and in the romances. On the stage means they were inserted into drama, and they were also inserted into romances. England became the impassioned lover of song. England became the impassioned lover of song. Impassioned means અધીરો બનેલો યુગ છે કે જે યુગમાં ઇંગ્લેન્ડમાં ખૂબ જ સોંગ્સ લખાયા અને વંચાયા. Most were love songs. Others were religious and purely fantastic, sentimental and cynical. Cynical means pessimistic or suspicious. So the themes of these songs were love songs, religious songs, and purely fantastic as well as sentimental and cynical songs were written during this time. They were written by the greatest and the unknown poets. Some great poets also produced such songs, as well as they were produced by some unknown poets also. England. Merry England was a nest of singing birds. England of that time, it was called the Merry England. Merry means Anandit. Merry England was a nest of singing birds. Nest of singing birds in Gujarati we can say Gata Pankhino Malo. Why it is so called? Because song is sung by the people of England. So many songs were written, produced, published and read during this time, and that is why this period is known as the period of singing birds, and that is why it is aptly said that Merry England was a nest of singing birds. There is not any music of instruments. Now it is also a special peculiarity. So there was not any music of instruments whatsoever comparable to that which is made of the voices of men. Whatever was composed, it was by the voices of men. Poetry makes melody and not melody poetry. Now this is the ideology they believed in, rather they followed. Poetry makes melody. મેલેડી એ પોએટ્રી દ્વારા રચાય છે. મેલેડી એટલે જે સૂર અથવા જેને ધૂન કહીએ તે, તો મેલેડી એ પોએટ્રીથી રચાય છે, નોટ મેલેડી પોએટ્રી, કે મેલેડીથી એ પોએટ્રી રચાતી નથી. સો પોએટ્રી મેક્સ મેલેડી and not melody poetry. It is very proper to believe in. Spenser inserted very beautiful, slightly elaborate songs in his Shepherd's Calendar and Sidney in his Arcadia. Spenser and Sidney, both these sonnet writers, also wrote their songs and they inserted them. Slightly elaborate songs also were written and inserted them into Shepherd's Calendar by Spenser and Sidney in his Arcadia. Then another valuable field for the song of the time was afforded by the drama. Drama became a vehicle of carrying songs along with that, along with it. The most exquisite songs of all were to be heard on the stage. Means most exquisite songs, exquisite means best quality songs were heard on the stage. That means they were heard by the audience while the performance of the drama is made on the stage. So they were inserted into drama. So best quality songs were found in the presentation of the drama. Many pleasing songs occur in George Pilley's dramas. So in the dramas of George Pilley we find most pleasing songs. The songs with which Shakespeare has showered his work are the most original and spontaneous of all and the richest in impression of nature. The songs written by Shakespeare, they are of the supreme quality. They are most original and spontaneous. Original means the idea, presentation and everything related to the song is original, his own, and they are the creations of the spontaneity by Shakespeare. So spontaneity means સ્વયંભૂ અંદરથી જ સ્ફુરેલા હોય તેવા પ્રકારના વિષયો ઉપર લખાયેલા, mostly associated with the impression of nature we find in the songs of Shakespeare. A fresh and rustic realism runs through the songs of The Winter's Tale and As You Like It. We have the examples of the songs of Shakespeare in his dramas. The Winter's Tale and As You Like It, we find the fresh and rustic realism running through his songs. Fresh and rustic. Rustic realism means the realism that is being observed by him in the rural environment. There are short love songs in Twelfth Night and The Merchant of Venice. Two more plays we have by Shakespeare, into which we find short love songs. Twelfth Night and The Merchant of Venice are the best examples of that kind. But the list is inexhaustible, and the list goes on like this. It is inexhaustible, it is infinite, it is unlimited. So many dramas we have by Shakespeare, into which we find such songs inserted in. Most of the songs were born of a particular occasion. Now this is also very important, that the songs are not wrongly placed into the drama. The placing of the song in the drama is at a very apt or appropriate location, and they are born of a particular occasion. For a particular occasion, the song is composed or written, produced, and are planted in the scene where they cannot be taken away without injury to the piece. If you take away the song from that piece, from that scene or act of the drama, that act will definitely be injured if you take away the song from that place. So the importance of the song is very much apt there in the drama. Shakespeare's contemporaries had neither his varied wealth nor his realism. Shakespeare is Shakespeare. He cannot be compared with his contemporaries also, but they decorated their plays with songs as sweet and melodious as his. Shakespeare's originality, spontaneity, and wealth and realism that cannot be compared with his contemporary writers. But his contemporary writers were also successful in making their plays with songs as sweet and melodious as Shakespeare's. Ben Jonson, Thomas Baker, and Blument and Fletcher include such songs in their plays. So these are the names of the dramatists who have composed their dramas with the, songs inserted in them. Okay. Now let us move to the next form, that is satire. The writers of satires. Satire flourished in various forms since Renaissance. From the very early years of the Renaissance period, we find satire written, published by so many authors and poets. Spenser's Mother Hubbard's Tale is a satire, and there is an element of it in some of the eclogues of the Shepherd's Calendar. A long poem published by Spenser, that is Shepherd's Calendar, also include the element of satire in the eclogues presented in the Shepherd's Calendar. There are three important writers in this field of art. They are Joseph Hall, John Marston, and John Donne. We find Spenser everywhere in all forms of poetry, but especially when we talk about the form of satire in the poetry writing, we have these three names: Joseph Hall, John Marston, and John Donne. Joseph Hall claimed for himself the title of being the first satire writer, but no one ever is the first, and the satirical poetry is nearly as old as the language. When Joseph Hall claims that he is the first in the list of the satire writers or the satirical poets. But his claim cannot be accepted because satirical poetry is nearly as old as the English language. So his claim is not accepted by the readers as well as the critics. Next poet is John Marston. He was the most cynical of the Elizabethan satire writers. Cynical means pessimistic. While writing satirical poetry, John Marston proves to be very pessimistic. Under the pretense of teaching morals, Marston allows himself to go to the extreme of coarseness both in subject and language. Marston considers himself to be a teacher of morals. He is trying to teach morals to the society, and in doing so, he chooses such subjects and language that is coarse, that is very rough, and that is why it is not good for the poet. Next poet is John Donne. Though not the first, yet he was the most important poet of the group. The name of John Donne is very important so far as the poetry of the Elizabethan age is concerned. Alexander Pope found in Donne a satirist whose style and temper were closer in essential spirit to his own than those of Horace. Horace, a Roman poet. Now, Alexander Pope, he found in John Donne a satirist. So, the quality of a satirist poet in John Donne is accepted by Alexander Pope. He sees in John Donne the style and temper, and they were closer in essential spirit to his own than compared to the qualities of Horace, a Roman poet. John Donne introduced satire of the classical type into English. So the poetry of classical type in writing satire was introduced by John Donne into English language. Now let us see the pastoral poetry. Friends, this is a new word for you, pastoral. Pastoral means rural, related to the life of the shepherds or farmers or the priests. This is related to the ancient culture of the ancient civilization. So pastoral is related to the life of the shepherds, their habits, their manners, their customs, their rituals. The life related to those people and the surrounding is included in pastoral poetry. Pastoral is always more or less an affectation. Affectation means mannerism. It is the townsman's dream of country life. A townsman visualizing the life of a countryman, a man living into the country. Country means village. So this kind of visualization is being presented into the pastoral poetry. It has always been written in the stages of high civilization, as by Virgil and Theocritus. We are tempted to refer to two important poets of the ancient civilization. They are Virgil and Theocritus. The names we are borrowing from the early years or ancient years before Christ. ઈસુ ખ્રિસ્તના જન્મના પહેલાંના વર્ષોમાંથી આપણે બે નામ બોરો કરીએ, બે નામ લઈ આવીએ તો એ બે રાઇટર્સ, બે પોએટ્સ આપણને મળે. દે આર વર્જિલ એન્ડ થિયોક્રિટસ. the time span of Virgil is 70 BC to 19 BC. 70 BC to 19 BC. You can understand the mentioning of the years before Christ. ક્રાઇસ્ટના જન્મ પહેલાંનો સમય અને આપણે બીસીથી ઉલ્લેખીએ છીએ, તો એને કંઈક આ રીતે લખવો પડે. આપણે સ્લાઇડમાં તમે જોઈ શકો છો 70 BC to 19 BC. This is the span of Virgil. Virgil is a Roman poet and he is best known for his national epic, that is the epic he has written named the Aeneid. He wrote pastoral poetry with eclogues, and the other name is Theocritus. Theocritus is older compared to Virgil. His time span is from 300 BC to 260 BC, right? He is also an ancient poet. He is a Sicilian poet and creator of the ancient Greek pastoral poetry. So pastoral word comes to us giving the picture of the rural life. So this kind of poetry was also produced during the Elizabethan age, and our great Edmund Spenser, the great poet of the Elizabethan period, he comes with his best known poem, that is the pastoral poem, The Shepherd's Calendar. The first poem with which Spenser made his name as a great poet was a pastoral poem, The Shepherd's Calendar. Now the pastoral poem, the title The Shepherd's Calendar, and Spenser, this is very important for us to remember that this poem made Spenser very valuable, very important and noteworthy poet of the Elizabethan time, which was the maidenhood of his poetry. Maidenhood means એનો કૌમાર્યનો દિવસો હતા, એના યુવાનોના દિવસો હતા. તો this poetry made him very great poet or the known poet among the Elizabethan poets. Spenser took the pastoral form because in the third quarter of the 16th century, pastoralism lent itself to the expression of complex emotions. In the third quarter of the 16th century, 16મી સદીના ત્રીજા ક્વાર્ટરમાં, એનો મતલબ એ થયો કે 1521 થી 1530 સુધીનો સમયગાળો. This may be the time span. So third quarter of the 16th century, they were marked with pastoralism, and to express the complex emotions, pastoralism was used, and Spenser took up this form of writing pastoral poetry. You can read something more about pastoral poetry into this. Let us keep it here. Then the next form is epic poetry. Epic is a very long poem. Epics we have in our culture, Indian culture or Hindu civilization, that is the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, they are known as the epics. મહાકાવ્યો જેને કહીશું આપણે, ધાર્મિક અથવા આધ્યાત્મિક કલ્ચરને અથવા એવી સંસ્કૃતિને રજૂ કરતા વિષયો ઉપર લખાતી કવિતા, જે લોંગ એપિકલ પોએટ્રી કહેવાય. In The Fairy Queen, Spenser gave England its first romantic epic. The Fairy Queen is the name of an epic written by Edmund Spenser. Again Spenser we have to remember here. He is a great poet of the Elizabethan time, and he wrote his first romantic epic titled The Fairy Queen. Epic was in a special degree national poetry. In a special degree means special title was given to epic poetry as a national poetry. Now we should also mention and remember this, that Greece had her Homer, and Rome her Virgil. જે રીતે ગ્રીસમાં એક નેશનલ પોએટ તરીકે હોમરનું નામ ગણાય છે, એમ રોમમાં વર્જિલનું નામ ગણાય છે. એ જ રીતે ઇંગ્લેન્ડની વાત કરતા હોય તો ત્યાં સ્પેન્સરનું નામ આપણે લેવું પડે. સો સ્પેન્સર હેઝ બીન કન્સિડર્ડ એઝ ધી નેશનલ પોએટ with his national poetry, that is epic. So the epic in all ages and all stages of culture reflects the life and manners, the tastes and pursuits of the ruling class. Now epic is such kind of poetry which reflects or rather shows the life and manners, tastes and pursuits of the ruling class, the king or the queen who is the ruler of the nation. His life is being presented in this poetry. Virgil is the poet of the imperial court of Augustus. Now if we consider Virgil to be the poet of court of the King Augustus, the same way Spenser is equally a court poet in the court of Queen Elizabeth. 16th century England, fully conscious that she had taken her place among the great nations, that she might lack nothing of national splendor and dignity, required an epic, and Spenser gave it to her. 16મી સદીમાં જેમાં ઇંગ્લેન્ડની જાહોજલાલી સરસ રીતે વિકસી રહી છે, એમાં એની પાસે કંઈ જ નહોતું ખૂટતું. એવરીથિંગ વોઝ વિથ ઇંગ્લેન્ડ. શી માઇટ લેક નથિંગ ઓફ નેશનલ સ્પ્લેન્ડર. સ્પ્લેન્ડર મીન્સ ભવ્યતા. એન્ડ ડિગ્નિટી, એનો મોભો ભવ્યતા દર્શાવવામાં કંઈ જ ન ખૂટે એવી સ્થિતિ હતી. ઓનલી એપિક વોઝ required an epic, and that epic was given by Spenser, and that made him the poet of the nation, right? Spenser's age was heroic, and heroes were his friends. Now when Spenser is a national poet, the national poetry he is writing, and that is why his association with the court of the nation means Queen's court. He has his relations and associations with the heroes of the nation. Heroes were his friends. So Spenser's age was heroic and heroes were his friends. The Fairy Queen is in fact a prolonged poem to the glory of England. What is shown in the epic, that is the Fairy Queen, the prolonged poem titled The Fairy Queen is showing the glory of England. His fairyland is neither more nor less than England itself. Means the picture that is presented by Spenser in The Fairy Queen is neither more nor less than England. Means everything related to England has been beautifully presented by Spenser in The Fairy Queen. The supreme figure of this poem is she whose name is always on the tips of contemporary poetry, the Queen Elizabeth. Who is the name? The name of the Queen Elizabeth is very much there to show the power of the nation. So this is something about the epic poetry of the Elizabethan time. And last but not the least, the religious poetry. અધ્યાત્મ સાથે સંકળાયેલી અથવા ધાર્મિક વિષયોને રજૂ કરતી કવિતા. The poetry of piety. Piety means holiness or godliness. The poetry of piety and philosophy became prominent in the last decade of the Elizabethan time. Poetry of holiness associated with the religion and philosophy it has been presented in the last decade of the Elizabethan age. In purely religious poetry, the period was not so rich. No richness can be seen in the presentation of religious kind of poetry. The only one important poet of the age, specifically a purely religious poet, was Southwell. Only one name comes to us as Southwell, who wrote the religious poetry in the last decade of the Elizabethan time. Saint Peter's Complaint is a long poem describing the incidents of the last days of the life of Christ. Now, these are the two important names of the poetry written by Southwell. The first is Saint Peter's Complaint, giving the subject like the last days of the life of Christ, and the second name is the burning babe, shows the child Christ, Christ child on fire with suffering and love. With this subject, the second poem is also written. Others who belong to this field were Sir John Davis and John Davis of Hereford. These two are also the religious poets of the time, but not so known to the readers. So, such is the panorama of the Elizabethan poetry, beginning with the sonnets, then songs, then satirical poetry, then pastoral poetry, epic poetry, religious poetry, etc. All such kind of poetry has been very greatly produced during the time of Queen Elizabeth, and that is why the country, means England, is called the nest of singing birds in the time of Queen Elizabeth. Okay, friends, with this I would like to conclude the discussion of this topic. It has a very long discussion. Thank you very much. Try to listen to these video lectures repeatedly. It will help you to understand it well. Okay, thanks again.